In terms of the small boats issue and the Rwanda plan, it's just in the process of being implemented. Once it's fully implemented, as we know from Australia's experience with the Nauru offshore processing scheme, it should work as a substantial deterrent. And certainly in the case of Australia, offshore processing has been extremely successful in stopping people making those dangerous journeys across the channel. And overall with immigration programs, I mean, my view, my personal view about immigration programs is you want to set a target for the number of migrants you're going to bring into the country every year based on the circumstances of the country. And you want to subdivide those people into categories. So there are family reunions, there are student visas, there are people who come with skilled visas, as we call them in Australia, and refugees, resettling refugees. So if you subdivide people into those four categories and work out how many people you can reasonably accommodate every year, depending on economic and social circumstances, then an immigration program should work pretty well.
But when it comes to the minority who are refugees or asylum seekers, under international law, you have to process them, don't you? It's not a question of you setting a number.
It is a question of you setting a number, because you can't take everybody in the world who, I mean, just to be reductio ad absurdum, I know, but you can't take everybody in the world who would qualify
No,
to
I was
be
talking about the legalities, really, though.
yeah, and indeed in terms of the legalities, the legal requirement under the Refugee Convention, the legal requirement is that you provide people with protection, not that you turn them into migrants into your own country and allow them permanently to settle in your own country. That's a different question. You might want to let some of them, but your obligation for people who are refugees is to make sure that they are able to remain in a place where they're protected from the persecution from which they're fleeing. And that might be in your own country, but it doesn't have to be in your own country. It can be anywhere on earth which is safe. That is the legal obligation. And I don't think people always understand that. They confuse immigration with the protection of refugees. Refugees are not people who you necessarily would turn into permanent migrants.
Well, let's take that particular group of people, often coming to the UK in small boats. You are an advisor to the government on the Rwanda scheme. You know,
Well,
you've pointed
that's a
out.
bit of an exaggeration, but yeah.
Well, you are advising the government in some capacity regarding the Rwanda scheme. As you pointed out, it's obviously not up and running yet, and we are expecting the government to get those first flights off in the next couple of weeks. Do you have any reservations about the policy as it stands at the moment, given that the numbers who are likely to go to Rwanda are quite small, and as we understand it, it will only apply to men, young men, and not to women and children who are also obviously arriving here?
Well, my view is that you do need to have a comprehensive scheme, and that is because the object of the exercise is to stop people paying people smugglers thousands of euros to embark on these extraordinarily perilous journeys across the English Channel, and try to get into the UK that way. And I mean, some of them, and certainly courtesy of the people smugglers, try to game the system. So you want to try to stop that practice. And the best way to stop it is to make it clear to people who might otherwise pay people smugglers that they won't get what the people smugglers promise, and that is to be delivered into the UK. So if you take them to Rwanda for processing, then if they know they're going to go to Rwanda for processing, then they won't get to the UK. Then they'll probably choose, I don't know, but they'll probably choose to stay in France. So it would lead to a very sharp decline in the number of people coming across. I mean, in the case of Australia, we sent people to Nauru, which is a tiny place compared to Rwanda. We sent them there. It couldn't, in theory, accommodate large numbers of people. But on the other hand, we never had to accommodate large numbers of people because not large numbers of people didn't pay people smugglers to end up in Nauru.
But
So
I suppose the problem the UK government has is we're obviously geographically very different to Australia, but we do have this concern at the moment that I think 8,000 people have made that trip across the channel so far this year alone. That is a new record. I mean, Rwanda doesn't have the capacity to be taking thousands of people a week. They've said the scheme
No.
200 to 300. So what do you do with all of those thousands of people who are
Sorry,
arriving?
I think you're misunderstanding the concept. Of course, thousands of people are coming across because they think they can stay in the UK. They're coming from France, by the way, and they think they can stay in the UK, and they'd rather live in the UK than France. I mean, to be honest with you, if they knew they couldn't stay in the UK, they wouldn't come.
But they do know that, don't they? Because the government has announced the Rwanda policy. It's done quite a lot of
they haven't
advertising
implemented
around it. Well, it is implemented. It's technically passed. It's not been triggered formally, but the government has the capacity now to send people to Rwanda and says it will start doing that within the next couple of weeks, and yet people are still coming.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Once then just telling people that you're going to go to Rwanda isn't enough. You have to send them there. Once people start being sent to Rwanda, then they will stop coming. Once the person paying the people smuggler is of the view that by doing so they will end up in Rwanda, they will stop coming. They will stop embarking on that dangerous journey. And I mean, I can't believe anybody thinks it's a good idea to encourage people to make a journey across the English Channel on a tiny little boat like that from France. I mean, wherever they may originally have come from, they're coming from France. They would be much safer staying in France than embarking on a journey.
I suppose the question is the odds, though, isn't it? If the government is saying we are going to send 200 to 300 people in the first instance to Rwanda, and we're going to slowly ramp up the scheme, but there are tens of thousands of people who've already arrived in small boats in the UK now, and thousands continuing to arrive. You look at those odds and you think, well, I'm probably not actually going to be sent to Rwanda in the end, so I might as well just give it a shot.
Well, the people who are in the UK already are not. That's not a relevant calculation. The calculation will be, and those people. I mean, think about it. If you were one of them, those people will think they'll end up in Rwanda. If everybody who comes across from a particular point does end up in Rwanda, they will think, well, it's not worth the risk. So you're right to raise that question. But it's quite logical. It's actually quite simple. Put yourself in the position of somebody trying to get to from France to the UK, courtesy of a people smuggler. If you think you can get into the UK and you think you'll be accepted as a refugee and you'll turn into a migrant, well, then you'll give it a go if you particularly want to go to the UK rather than stay in France. But if, on the other hand, you think you're going to end up in Rwanda, you won't give it a go.
But there are significant differences with the Australian scheme that you were involved with. A lot of people say it wasn't actually being sent to Nauru that stopped people. It was actually the physical turning back of boats, which is not being proposed.
Yeah, I mean, you can only turn back boats when it's safe to do so. And by the way, the people smugglers quickly get onto that and sink the boats. So yeah, that from their point of view solves that problem.
You wouldn't recommend that. You wouldn't recommend the UK doing that. You wouldn't think that was a good idea here.
Well, we turned back. I mean, it would. There are all sorts of issues there. Which you'd have to look at your relations with France, the reaction of the French authorities. You'd have to look at the types of boats. I mean, looking as I have done at the types of boats involved, it's not really practical to turn them back. So the other thing is that turnbacks can only happen in international waters, and for part of the channel there are no international waters. There's just a common border between the UK and France. So,
but that would suggest it might be less successful, this policy. The other big difference
yeah,
is,
I mean, I don't think it's much of. I mean, more than less. I'm sure it would be successful, but I just don't think it's practical. It's too difficult to do. But let me just make this point: if you had an agreement with France that anybody who tried to come across the channel that way would be returned to France, then nobody would bother to try anymore. But France won't agree to that, so that's the end of that proposition.
Yeah, but it's also true that most of those people in France have actually come through previous so-called safe countries anyway, haven't they?
They have. Yeah, exactly, they have, yeah.
Right. And the other big difference is you talk about processing, but the plan to send people to Rwanda is not to process their applications, it's to expel them, to reject their applications and to expel them, which is very...
No, it's not. It's to process their applications. And again, there's a whole lot of confusion.
Well, so you're saying people sent to Rwanda could come back to the UK?
No, no, no. They could be processed and found to be refugees and be provided with protection. See, what you're doing is confusing immigration with protection under the Refugee Convention. The obligation for refugees is distinct from migrants. They're quite distinct from migrants. The obligation is to provide the refugees with protection, somewhere safe to stay. I mean, in theory, pending when they can return safely to their own country of origin. That may or may not happen, of course. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But that's the obligation, not to turn them into migrants. So they will be sent to Rwanda. They will be processed in Rwanda. And if they're found to be refugees, they will be perfectly safe in Rwanda.
What do you make of the Labour Party's plans to scrap the Rwanda scheme if they are elected, whenever the election comes?
Well, I don't want to get into party politics. That's not my role. But I would say the Rwanda scheme, or the offshore processing scheme, is the ultimate deterrent. And we know from Australian experience will stop people making these dangerous journeys. So if you scrap that, then what will be the thought process that goes through people who want to pay a people smuggler several thousand euros to come across the channel? They may as well give it a go, because there's no downside to it. I mean, whether Labor government would process applications faster or slower won't make any difference to that calculation that a putative migrant might make. It's not going to make the slightest difference. So, and they say they will put the intelligence agencies onto the tracking down these criminal gangs on the continent and beyond the continent, by the way. Well, that's already happening. Intelligence services are already doing a lot of work, and they're collaborating with each other, the British, the French, the Germans, the Belgians, and so on. So there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of work going on. But these criminal gangs they're not big organizations. These are small groups of people, often based far away in Kurdistan and places like that. So it's very difficult. If it was so easy, it would have been done already, of course.
But the final argument against it is prohibitively expensive. It's going to cost more than £1 million per person removed to Rwanda. And the argument of the critics is that they're just better ways to spend that money dealing with this particular issue.
Well, I don't think you can make that financial. I don't think an accountant would give you 10 out of 10 for that calculation, because you have absolutely no idea how many people you're going to be dealing with. I mean, there's a fixed cost in this operation. There are some variable costs with just the cost of the flight. But there are fixed costs. So the more people you deal with, the less it costs per person. I mean, it depends whether you value stopping people coming across the channel or whether you don't. I mean, I think people need to weigh that up. If you think it's okay, then spending £1 on it is a waste of money. But if you, in which case, if you think it's okay for people to come across the channel, why are you forcing them to embark on these dangerous journeys, paying people smugglers on small boats? Why not just charter ferries and bring them across safely? I mean, that's the logic of basically having a view that these people should be processed in the UK. Don't force them to make these dangerous journeys. But if you think the journeys are too dangerous and people shouldn't be doing that, then police the system properly. And the easiest way to do that is to send people off for processing offshore.